Welcome back to the Healthy and Whole podcast. Today, we're going to jump into a huge topic, which is that of emotional and stress eating. And this is a huge topic. In fact, it's one that I don't even know if we can cover it all in one podcast episode. It's not just a huge problem for our clients, right? Something that we see pop up a lot within our coaching program at Healthy and Whole. I think that emotional eating and stress eating is actually one of the biggest issues facing public health. It's just like when we think about the mental health crisis that I think that we have in the United States, at least, with depression and anxiety and mental health in general. I think emotional eating is sort of a downstream impact of that. But I think it's huge because when you look at the statistics for weight loss, permanent weight loss, they're really ugly, right? I actually looked it up before we did this episode just to see, and it's about 90% of people in the world who lose weight regain all of it,
and then some,
and then they gain it all back, and then they actually gain a little bit more. Yeah, right. And there's reasons we won't go into for why they end up gaining more than they had previously. It's another conversation for another podcast, but 90%,
that's a huge number.
It's scary, right?
Yeah.
But that's why I say I think this is one of the biggest issues that we're facing, because it really is a health crisis. It's not just a mental health crisis; it's a health crisis, right? The percentages of United States adults who are overweight, obese, and morbidly obese, type 2 diabetes, all of these different things that are trending very strongly in the wrong direction, and we're not seeing good headwinds going in the other way to turn them around. And it kind of leaves you asking yourself, why do 90% of people who try to lose weight end up failing and getting it all back? And in our experience in working with a lot of people at Healthy and Whole, I have definitely identified that probably the biggest issue is that of emotional eating and stress eating, right? And, I see this pop up because one thing that I think we do really well at Healthy and Whole that I think is missing a lot of places is we actually do design our curriculum and our program around permanent and sustainable weight loss, meaning that, we really put a ton of effort in helping the people to love the food that they eat and, to develop a lot of intrinsic motivation, to develop a lifestyle that they want to live. So then it's like, okay, when we're working with folks to develop a lifestyle that they actually want to live, not that they feel like they're being forced into living to get healthy, why then, right, do this massive amount of people in the world still struggle with this? And why do we still run into sometimes resistance when it comes to that, right? Yeah. And emotional eating is really the reason that happens.
Yeah.
So it's a big one.
It's a big boy.
I'm excited to jump into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've got some questions for you.
All right,
Mr. Matt, and you're gonna hopefully answer those questions for me. Detailed manner.
Let's do it.
Are you prepared?
I'm as prepared as I'm ever going to be.
Sounds delightful. Okay. So the first question that I have for you is, first of all, what's on everyone's mind? What is emotional eating, and or stress eating? And first of all, is there a difference between the two?
Mm-hmm.
And then second of all, why does it happen?
Yeah. So I think ultimately emotional eating and stress eating are just the same thing with a different label.
Okay.
Right. Emotional eating essentially it's basically a process that's repeated over and over again, right? We have some kind of a trigger that happens, something that stimulates us, and that trigger or that stimulus or that situation creates I'm really trying to retrain even myself to use different words when I talk about this topic. I used to find myself saying a negative emotion, but I hate to use the word negative emotion, and you'll understand why here as we get into talking more about emotional eating. But really, I think a better word would be uncomfortable emotions, right?
Okay.
So situation, a stimulus, something in life happens that we perceive in a certain way. It triggers uncomfortable emotions, whether that is anxiety, stress, worry, panic, anger, frustration, sadness, grief, loneliness. I mean, insert whatever uncomfortable emotions. There are many of them out there into that blank, but we're triggered. We develop a feeling of some kind of an uncomfortable emotion, and then we turn to a behavior in response to that uncomfortable emotion, right? And so emotional eating or stress eating happens because ultimately we're feeling something that is uncomfortable to us, right? We're feeling an uncomfortable emotion that it doesn't feel good. And we're human beings. We don't like to feel things that don't feel good, right? We don't like pain. We don't like discomfort inherently. And so we typically will turn to something that is going to relieve that, right? And unfortunately, in our modern day society, I think this is also a trend in other areas as well. I think we're kind of being trained to be very, what's the word? Immediate gratification.
Oh yeah.
Right? Everything in our world right now, especially, is very much revolves around immediate gratification, right? Social media, fast food, all these different things. And so I think we kind of, unfortunately, have also trained ourselves to seek immediate gratification when it comes to the relieving of uncomfortable emotions, right? And so scientifically, what's basically happening is we're triggered by a life circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
We perceive that life circumstance in a unhelpful way. That creates a feeling or emotion that is uncomfortable. And that feeling or that emotion is actually hormonal changes going on within our body that make us physically feel the manifestation of that emotion, mental or emotional thing. And we don't like the way that feels. And so what is the opposite of that hormonal change that's happening in our body? That would be so if we get triggered by an emotion or something like that causes us to feel the physical manifestation of stress, there are certain hormones that do that, like cortisol and epinephrine.
Yep.
And things like that kind of amp us up and make us feel in ways that we don't want to feel. The opposite of that would be things like feel-good hormones, like dopamine, serotonin. And so basically what happens is human beings, we've been basically trained that there are certain go-to things that can allow us to feel a sensation that is the opposite of stress, such as the feeling of a dopamine hit. And there's a lot of things that can deliver that, the most common one being food.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you think that kind of stems from early childhood when it comes to, celebrations and holidays, get-togethers and stuff? Do you think it stems from that, or?
I think it's definitely connected to that. Basically, what's happening is we learn it, right? We create neural associations, right? So that does happen early on in our lives, right? When we're children, that's also why almost everything in our culture revolves around food, right? When we celebrate something, what do?
We eat food.
Eat food. And we don't just eat boring food. We eat really good tasting food, right?
Yeah.
When we are sad, a lot of times we'll turn to food. When we, insert whatever it is, holidays, vacations, getting together with friends, all of these different things, we have created these neural associations, these brain-rooted associations with the dopamine spikes and hits that we get from food, right? It's why it's really hard when people say, oh, well, let's go out with, I'm going to go out with my girlfriend or my guy friend, or we're going to go out as a group of friends. Have you ever tried to just say, hey guys, let's go out, but let's not eat anything. Let's just go hang out. What's the first thing people suggest is where are we going to go eat?
Yep.
We've developed these neural associations between food and all of these different things in our lives, right? Well, the same neural associations happen between food and uncomfortable emotions, right? So, but I think we start training our brain to associate food with things at a very young age, right? Our parents reward us with food, birthdays with food, Christmas with food. When we cry, oh, here's let me make it better. Let me give you some ice cream.
Kind of reminds me of that Friends episode whenever Chandler goes through a breakup and then the girls, Monica, Rachel, and Phoebe, they're all giving him ice cream. They give him like the skim ice cream. And he's like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
And then they go and get real ice cream. But that's how they make themselves feel better.
But I mean, that's a beautiful, real, shockingly real example
Yeah.
of how those associations happen. And so no matter how they happen, right? We ultimately develop a neural association between something, whether it's an uncomfortable emotion or a reward. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
We develop an association between that thing and the dopamine release that we get from eating a really indulgent, tasty treat of some kind of food that we really like, right?
Right.
And what actually ends up happening is it creates a form of dependency or addiction, right? It's why you hear the terms emotional eating, stress eating, and addiction used very interchangeably in the same circles, because they are essentially, we are creating a dependency.
Yeah.
Right. We are creating a deep neural association between a trigger, an uncomfortable emotion,
Yeah.
and a chemical release of dopamine to counter that. Right.
So a deep emotional attachment to those certain foods.
Basically.
Could be certain foods or a certain kind of food.
Right. Ultimately, what we end up doing is we create a reflex.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why emotional eating, most people who really struggle with emotional eating, they find it really difficult to step out of it. And oftentimes they even, like, we've had clients where we work with where emotional eating is a big problem. And sometimes they're not even aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost completely subconscious. Like, they may be showing up to a coaching session saying, I don't understand. I'm so frustrated. I'm doing everything right. I'm working out. I'm hitting my steps. I'm even logging my food,
Mm-hmm.
And all this stuff. And it's not working.
Yeah.
But then when we start asking the right questions, all of a sudden it will come out and they'll say, well, I do struggle with emotional eating.
Mm.
And it's like, there's a moment there as a coach where you're like, why didn't we lead with that? But it's because it's almost subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have reflexes that we do every day that we don't even know that we do them anymore, because it's just it's just how it is, right? They become second nature. Emotional eating can almost become second nature, where we don't even recognize that we do it anymore.
Yeah.
Right? It's autopilot.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what's happening there. Is we have a trigger, we have an uncomfortable emotion, we then associate and create a neural connection between the dopamine release of food that creates this illusion of comfort or soothing that's happening. And because there's the chemical dependency, right, and the neural association with it, we tend to just become a reflexive to it. And most people just never stop to question whether the relief or the soothing effect that they're getting, the comfort that they're getting from emotional eating or stress eating, is actually serving them or being effective in any way, right?
Yeah. Do you think that also applies to, so you mentioned people who say they do all the right things and then come to find out when we ask the right questions, we uncover some emotional eating patterns that they have. Do you think that also, maybe someone who struggles with knowing what to do, but then not doing those things, do you think that also could be something under the umbrella of emotional eating?
Oh, 100%. This is why I think that emotionally eating is probably, if you just were to map out all of the different reasons why that 90% of people gain their weight back, this one would be the heaviest hitter. Like, there are other reasons why people gain their weight back. Like, for instance, one of the reasons why people gain their weight back has nothing to do with emotional eating, but it's just because they try to rely on a diet or some kind of a solution that works and gets results in the short term, but they have no enjoyment.
Right.
Like, it's like someone who goes to eats keto because they recognize that when they eat keto, they get great results, but they actually don't enjoy eating keto. And so they're kind of counting the days until they don't have to eat keto anymore. And then the second they stop eating keto, they gain their weight back. So that's an example of a reason that someone might gain their weight back that has nothing to do with emotional eating. But if I was to sort of extrapolate out and graph out, I think that we would find that emotional eating is the biggest one. And the reason why is because, this is something that we have. This is also why emotional eating is our biggest focus this year within Healthy and Whole, and developing new curriculum around this, because we've already put so much in place when it comes to, permanent sustainable weight loss and health outcomes when it comes to the enjoyment of lifestyle. Like we've figured out how to teach people how to have food that they absolutely love, that feels like a cheat meal,
Mm-hmm.
and yet is still very high protein, high fiber, very low calorie, very filling, great for weight loss. Like we've bridged a lot of those gaps. We've solved so many different problems that used to be the reasons why people would gain their weight back. And so now we've knocked all these, picked all these different things off. And this is kind of like the last big one, which is why I've come to realize that it's probably the biggest one.
The image that I'm thinking of that comes to mind is like we've been kind of like digging for treasure, and like we're uncovering all this stuff and finally getting like the sustainable part out of the way, but then hitting some new things that are coming up for us, and we hit the chest. It's like the emotional eating. Like this is the big one that a lot of people struggle with.
It's the big one. Yeah. And it's to the point now where I have recognized that, and it's really complex when we're coaching people through this, right? Because when you bring someone into, say Healthy and Whole, and we're working with them on their journey,
Mm-hmm.
what we really probably should do and need to do would be to start with this, right? To start working around identifying and working on their mental, frameworks and emotional frameworks, and working on the thing of emotional eating first before we even really dive into other stuff. But that's not really effective, because people need to get early wins. People need to get in, start getting results. They need to start enjoying their food. They need to get active, because that helps you to start addressing mental and emotional health, and to start addressing emotional eating. Whereas if we started with it, it would just be so difficult. So it's kind of like that analogy, I think, really rings true, is you really do have to start digging down, finding some gold, getting some wins before you even can start to address the big one. But it's also ironically the thing that has to be addressed before we can have what I would call permanent and sustainable weight loss. Because if we teach you all of the skills and to give you all of the tools and the resources to build a lifestyle that you legitimately love living,
Mm-hmm.
right? None of it matters, because at the end of the day, what we know, one thing we know is true: life will challenge you.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no, time in life where your life will not ever challenge you, where you will never experience adversity, where you will never experience stressful situations or challenges in life, or loss, or grief, or betrayal, or loneliness. These are all things, big life transitions. Becoming an empty nester, seeing your kids go out and get married. All of these things carry emotional weight, and that is the nature of human life. Going from seasons of what I would call a spring or a summer season where things are really good, into a winter season. And as sure as the seasons, in real life, winter always comes after, summer and fall, and spring always comes after winter. So it's not a question of if life will challenge us or punch us in the gut or punch us in the mouth. It's a question of when.
Mm-hmm.
And we really have to develop and overcome the things that cause emotional eating at their root. Otherwise, even if we are lucky enough to go through a summer season to get all the way to our weight loss goal, and we didn't do any of that deeper work, that stuff is all going to be there waiting to drag us back.
So why people start with or have emotional eating and stress eating in the first place is these neural pathways that we develop as grow up. It's like the neural association that food is comfort, food is pleasure, food is going to make me feel better.
Yeah.
So we uncovered that. The next question is, if we all have similar upbringings and we all go through, the same kinds of celebrations, people are exposed to food just as often as the next person. Why do some people have emotional eating issues and some people don't?
Yeah. I mean, this is actually, I think, one of the best questions to ask, because when you ask questions like this, it can actually lead you down to what I think are the root causes and what I think are actually ultimately the solutions to starting to pull emotional eating up at its roots, right? But in order to understand it, I think you really have to look upstream from emotional eating, and also to look at things like dependency and addiction. And you have to start to understand, okay, because the dependency and addiction is the same way, right?
Yeah.
Like, why do some people in the world struggle with dependency and addiction and other people don't? Why do some people in the world become depressed or struggle with anxiety and some people don't? Right? A lot of sort of the traditional understanding of these things is that it has been that, maybe some people just are genetically predisposed to depression and anxiety and having chemical imbalances of their neurotransmitters and their brain chemicals that causes this, or makes them prone to physical addiction and dependency. At one point in time in my life, I might have bought into that. But as long as I've been coaching people, and in my own personal journey with all of those things, I have my own experience with depression and anxiety and addiction. And through my own personal experience and having coached a lot of people now through this, I don't buy into that explanation that it's genetic predisposition anymore.
Okay.
I think it's a lot more complex than that. I think that really what it boils down to, and I think it's the same whether you're looking at emotional eating, stress eating, depression or anxiety, and dependency and addiction, because when you really start to look at stress and emotional eating, it's almost always downstream from some degree of depression and or anxiety.
Yeah. So it's never really like one exact thing that causes someone to have emotional eating. It's kind of like layers.
Yeah.
It's that make them have that association.
For sure. I just think it's really important to start with the understanding that you don't often see, if ever see, people who struggle with emotional or stress eating who don't also struggle in general with emotional regulation or with depression or anxiety.
Okay.
And you also don't typically see those, who struggle with addiction or dependency who don't also struggle with things like emotional regulation and depression and anxiety. You see how these things tend to go together.
Yeah.
Right. And when you understand that most of the time, the reason these things go together is because sort of at the root, what's happening is that there are certain people in the world who have developed or who have learned or have been taught. They have developed better tools to basically traverse life. And then there are those who have not. Right. And I think that you can see this in my own personal journey with depression and anxiety and dependence and addiction, because, there's sort of, if you zoom out and look at the course of my life, starting in my late high school years, ramping up through my college years, and then all the way through probably my early 30s, right? I was starting to deal with varying degrees of depression and anxiety, social anxiety. I did not have a great relationship with myself. I did not have good mental and emotional frameworks to deal with life, to deal with so many different things, right? I was a pretty broken version of myself. And because of that, I struggled a lot. I struggled a lot. I smoked, I drank. I mean, I coped a lot with food. I had a dependency on a lot of different things throughout, the better part of a decade and a half. But in around, so I went through a pretty rough and brutal divorce in 2013, and I moved from Tennessee back to Indiana, and I went through maybe a year and a half to 2 years of just kind of struggling, in that depression and that anxiety and that dependency in different ways. And then in 2015, I kind of hit rock bottom. And in 2015, I had what I would call a little bit of an emotional breakdown. And I ended up being finally, for the first time in a long time, actually formally diagnosed with depression, anxiety. And I was put on medication. My childhood doctor at the time is the one that diagnosed me. She put me on Paxil, and she put me on Xanax as needed to cope with the life circumstances that had happened that had sort of put me into that mental break. And I took a little bit of time off work, started going to some therapy, did some things like that. But what happened in that time frame, once I was put on medication, I got a sense of relief. It's like I was able to be pulled out of sort of the brain chemical depression that I was in enough to start doing work on myself. Mm-hmm. And I went to a few therapy sessions, and I somehow, by the grace of God, got turned on to the whole world of personal development and self-growth. And I've always wanted to run my own business or to be my own boss. And so I think that's how I ended up in that, because most people who are in the entrepreneurial business ownership space also tend to find themselves in the world of going down the rabbit hole of personal growth and self-development.
Yeah.
And so I found myself diving into that world. And ultimately what happened in the course of me diving into that world and reading a ton of books and exposing myself to a lot of content is I started learning and I started growing at a ridiculous rate. Right. And over the course of even just a couple of years of reading and learning and being coached and going to therapy and all of that stuff, I very rapidly developed a lot of mental and emotional tools that I didn't have before. Mm-hmm. And I started learning how to deal with life and to deal with when life would punch me in the mouth. And I actually, for the first time, developed a positive relationship with myself, where I, for the first time in my life, appreciated who I was, knew who I was, liked who I was for the first time. Mm-hmm. So all these things started to come together for me. And then I no longer needed depression medication or anxiety medication. And therefore, I knew, and I had the frameworks and the tools to deal with my emotions, right? My uncomfortable emotions in a better way. And I no longer needed an ineffective tool like food or alcohol or cigarettes to do it. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So to answer your question, that was a very long way of answering your question of why does it seem to impact some people and not others? Again, the traditional approach to this would say that it's because some people are predisposed, or some people just have brain chemical neurotransmitter deficiencies, dopamine deficiencies, and that makes them prone to it. Yeah. I don't believe that that is the case in my own experience in coaching people and having gone through this myself. What I believe is that we end up creating our own neurotransmitter deficiencies. We end up creating our own depression and our own anxiety, because when we don't have the real tools to cope with life, mm-hmm. in an effective way, our uncomfortable emotions end up constantly driving the wrong types of chemicals within our body. And that causes depression, that causes anxiety. And that becomes this like feedback loop, right? That people get stuck in, where their thoughts and their emotions are driving negative or uncomfortable hormonal cascades in their body. Then that feeds back into the negativity of their thoughts, their emotions, and without the right tools and frameworks to break that and to rise out of it, they tend to be just stuck in that, right?
Yeah.
So you look at my life and my experience. The only reason I don't still struggle with depression and anxiety, and the only reason I don't now still struggle with, food addiction and emotional eating and stress eating and things like that. Don't get me wrong. I still have moments and times where life will test me, where I still can find that I have that reflex. It's still there. And sometimes it gets me. Sometimes I have to like stop and realize that I'm sliding back into it, right? And realize that I'm not using the tools sometimes that I've developed. Right. I just did that recently, right? I told everybody I made the decision to stop drinking again recently.
Yeah.
Because I recognized that it went from being just a fun social thing that I was doing to something more than that.
Yeah.
And I had fallen back into that old habit of recognizing that, I'm struggling mentally, emotionally, and I'm using an ineffective tool, right? So that's why I think some people really are impacted by emotional eating, depression, anxiety, dependency, and addiction, all of that stuff, more than others. Is it basically, there's kind of like two kinds of people in the world. There are the people who have already developed those tools, all of the tools that they need to traverse life in a healthier way, and those who have not yet developed those tools.
Yeah.
And without those tools, we're really prone to all of those things. And we'll kind of use the best tool we have. Right. Like, this may seem like kind of like a crazy analogy, but like, have you ever been trying to cut something open, cut open a box or something, and you don't have a knife around? So you just like look around, you're like, what, like, can I find anything,
a wooden spoon
with like a sharp edge? And you're trying to like, like open the box, like that's a very like rough analogy, I think, for what we do with emotional eating. It's like, we don't have the right tools, so we just use whatever tool we have.
Right.
And what's the most common tool available? Food. Right. And we are so surrounded by such hyper palatable, amazing tasting food that just like smashes that dopamine button in like crazy ways that it's no wonder we have such an association with it. Right.
Yeah. Would you also say like, I know we talk about the 6 human needs a lot on our podcast and just in general with our clients, but with those things, when it comes to like even the depression and the anxiety and that coping mechanism, would you say that that cycle is fulfilling some sort of need within the realm of 6 human needs?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So like, if we go back through the 6 human needs and what you're talking about, for those who don't know, Tony Robbins talks about this a lot. He has his own framework around what he calls the 6 human needs. And it's just the concept that we all have 6 like core human needs that we will always find a way to fill one way or another.
Yeah.
We can fill them in healthy ways and sustainable ways. And if we don't have healthy and sustainable ways of filling them, AKA the right tools for the job, then we will fill them in unhealthy, destructive ways, AKA the wrong tools for the job.
Even if we know it's hurting us, damaging us, it's, still fulfilling that need. So we'll still.
For sure. Yes. And it's difficult because, like I said, a lot of it becomes subconscious.
Sure.
Right. The 6 human needs are not conscious.
Yeah. You're not constantly thinking about filling those.
If you're aware of what the 6 human needs are and you're familiar with this concept, you can become conscious and you can start examining your behaviors and filtering them through to figure out, how might I be using food? What 6 human needs might I be filling? So for those who don't know the 6 human needs, there are 4 basic needs and then 2 higher level needs. You have the need for safety and certainty, stability in your life. This would just be like, I need to feel safe, basically. I need to know that I have money, I have a roof, I am not in physical danger or any kind of danger. Anything in my life that I can do to make me feel safe and secure and that I have certainty. That's a deep core human need. We have the need for variety, excitement. He also calls this uncertainty, right? And we will all find ways to have fun and experience new things and novelty and all of that. We have the need for love and connection with others. And that could be romantic or non-romantic. We have the need for significance, right? Meaning that we need to feel like we are seen. We need to feel like we are needed, not just loved, but like, it's kind of like that thing that like, if I was gone, would anybody notice? Right? Do I feel like I'm seen, wanted, needed, that kind of a thing?
Right.
Right? It's different. Some people get significance and connection and love, those 2 different needs, confused, but they really are different, right?
Okay.
Those are the 4 basic core human needs. And then we have, above that, we have the need for contribution, meaning we need to feel like we are contributing to the world and to the greater good in a way outside of ourselves, not filling our own needs, but helping to fill the needs of others, serving, things like that. And then there's the need for growth, the need for us to feel like we are learning, we are expanding, we are growing. We have all 6 human needs, right? And so what you're talking about is, could food be used to fill any of these basic core human needs? 100%. It happens all the time. That's why it's one of the ways that addiction happens, right? So like Tony Robbins is sort of famous for talking about the 6 human needs, and what he would say is that if you can use something like food to fill more than 3 or more of your basic 6 core human needs, then you will likely develop addiction to that thing, right? And so, for instance, if you do not have a whole lot of perceived certainty or stability in your life, right? Maybe you're not sure about your job or your finances, or you're worried about paying the bills, or you're in a relationship that is not safe, whatever. If there's things like that going on, right? You might turn to food, and that dopamine hit might masquerade as giving you that sense of control, right? Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I can't control any of these things in my life, but I can control this, right? Boom, food is now filling that need to, at least in that moment, give me a false sense of stability, safety, security. Is it real safety, stability, and security? It is not, right? But it's giving you that illusion, right?
Right.
Same thing if your life is relatively boring and you don't have a lot of friends, or you don't have much of a social life, or you just are a workaholic. You just work, and there's not a whole lot of fulfillment or excitement in that, right? You might just turn to food and order super indulgent tasting, or eat out a lot, or like do these different things with food to indulge that sense and fill that need for exciting things and novelty and trying new foods. And so again, is that a ideal, healthy, sustainable way to fill that need? Well, it depends, but probably not, right?
Right.
Same thing. Could we use food to fill the need for significance? How many times when you've gone over to see your mom or your grandma, or like anybody, like, do you get given food, right? Like my mom, all the time. She lives right across the driveway from us. All the time. The other day, she went to Rib Fest over here in Danville. She bought me a giant thing of ribs and a turkey leg. And she brought it back. Didn't even say anything. She just put it in my refrigerator. And I opened up my refrigerator, and this giant container in there full of all this food, right? She is the type of person who will love her to death. But this comes from her generation. This was a learned behavior in her generation, that we can reward people, right? We can become significant, right? in someone's life through food, right? Like grandparents do this all the time. They're like, well, if I don't shower the grandkids with sweets and indulgent treats when they come over, why would they want to come see me? Right? You're creating significance. You think you're creating significance in their life because you're showering them with all this stuff. And when ironically, they really just want to know you.
Yeah.
They really just want to have a relationship with you. I mean, of course they get excited. But that is not what creates the significance.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, might it create significance? Yes. But is it sustainable significance for you or for them? No. Right? Same thing, connection and love, right? How many of our social gatherings revolve around food?
Yeah.
Right? Is that a sustainable, healthy way for us to establish love and connection with people? Probably not.
No.
Right? What would happen if we broke that association? It would probably yield just as powerful, if not better, connections and love and connection between people.
Yeah.
When we take the interference of the static of food out of it.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question. So we definitely talked about what emotional eating is exactly. And then we talked about if everyone, or why doesn't everyone have it? And I guess it's like last question, or just last main question that I have is how do we then break that cycle? Like if some people are develop those neuro associations with food, how can we then break that association if we've had it for this long of a time? What are some ways we can kind of start to break that pattern?
Yeah. I can give some, I can break this down and I can give what I believe is the approach to take, but just understand this is a topic and a discussion that goes far beyond a podcast.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
If you're someone who struggles with emotional eating and stress eating, and it's really affecting control, you having the control that you want to have over your weight and your health in your life, then I'm going to describe to you what I think is the path out of that. But I want you to understand that I think the best thing that you can do is to go get help, right? We coach people through this all the time, but I can't coach everybody. You can't coach everybody. And so, but everybody, I think, who struggles with emotional eating and stress eating ultimately is going to need coaching to get through it, right? So I'm going to describe the pathway, but just knowing the pathway is not going to be enough, right? So how do we do it? How do we break the cycle of emotional eating? There's a few things. Number one, at its base level, before we get into the deeper parts of this, we have to break the neuro connections and associations that we have created in our brain between the trigger of the uncomfortable emotion and the soothing with the dopamine hit that comes with food. Okay. And so that starts by just stopping. Just stop, right? Now that sounds so easy, Matt. Just stop, right? Just stop turning to food when I feel uncomfortable. Well, I put that as step number one because as long as you're still doing it, all you're doing is reinforcing that neural association.
It's like scratching an itch.
Yeah, you're just scratching the itch. You're reinforcing and growing deeper and deeper and deeper roots into that neuro association between uncomfortable emotions or life circumstances and the dopamine release that comes with eating food, giving you a false sense of comfort or relief.
Yeah.
Right. So it stands to reason that if we're going to make real and earnest, genuine progress in this area, the first step is making that commitment to just say, I'm not going to turn to the food in response to these uncomfortable emotions. And then, of course, everybody says, well, Matt, why would I want to do that? Because these are very uncomfortable emotions. I'm turning to food for a reason, because I don't want to feel these emotions. And that's what informs the next parts of this discussion, right?
Yeah.
And this is also remember when we first started talking about this, I started to say negative emotions.
Yeah.
And I stopped myself and I said, I'm even trying to reprogram myself and stop saying things like negative emotions. right? Because I think this is part of the problem, is that we have this association or this belief that there are negative emotions. And I think that the reality is that there are no bad emotions, okay? There are no necessarily good emotions or bad emotions. There are emotions that make us feel one way, and there are emotions that make us feel another way, right? Which you could say there are enjoyable and more comfortable emotions and sensations, and there are uncomfortable or even painful emotions and sensations, right? So I think first you have to understand that you have to redefine emotion to say that these emotions that I'm feeling that are uncomfortable or painful are not bad. In fact, you have to understand that, and this is especially for those of you who have faith, right? For those of you in the world who can rely on your faith, who have a belief in, in God, this is where you would start to say to yourself, God in all of his glory and in all of his perfection, did God mess up? Like, did God screw up and make bad emotions? Like, did he mess up and make anger? Did he mess up and make grief or loneliness or sadness or jealousy?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't believe in that, right? So but regardless of your faith, you have to understand that these emotions, if you have faith, you would rest on the fact that, God didn't mess up. God made these emotions for a reason.
Right.
And if you don't have faith, then you go back to say, okay, how did we evolve? We didn't evolve these reasons, these emotions for nothing, right? These emotions were evolved, or they were given to us by God for a reason. Why? Right? And the best analogy that I've come up to help people to see this is to understand that emotions are actually like a fire alarm in your house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So imagine that you go home to your apartment and, you hear the fire alarm going off in your apartment and there's smoke in the apartment and you realize there's a fire in your kitchen. Would you go over and silence that fire alarm and pull the battery out of it and let the fire just keep burning?
No.
Of course not. That would be ludicrous to do that, right? Well, our emotions, our uncomfortable emotions, our painful emotions, those sensations that create those physiological things that we don't like to feel,
mm-hmm.
those are like fire alarms. Those are like fire alarms in the house, the home that is our inner self, right? And when we silence those alarms with food or cigarettes or alcohol or sex or pornography or anything that gives us that dopamine hit, right? It's akin to going over and turning off and silencing the fire alarm when that emotion is trying to tell you something. That emotion is signaling you that something is not right, right? Now, what do you do with that, right? Before we even get to that, I just want to continue to paint this analogy because I think it will resonate with people, right? For those people in the world who really are in the midst of struggling with emotional eating, right? They continue to emotional eat because deep down, they believe that there is some sense of genuine comfort or support or pleasure that is given them to them when they eat, right? But when they zoom out and they look at their life, they can realize that things don't get better when they emotionally eat. They slowly, if not quickly, get worse. And that's why I love this analogy of the fire alarm, because, you might start with just one little problem. Maybe it's your job. Maybe there's trouble at work. Maybe there's a conversation that you need to have, something you need to address at work, or maybe you just a job that you started in that was a job you loved at one point in time, or that you felt fulfilled with, or that filled your needs at one point in time, has something has changed and you don't want to be at that job anymore. It's become a negative thing for you in your life. It's not serving you in the way that it used to be, and you know it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's causing you to stress eat and emotionally eat, right? That's a fire alarm going off in your kitchen. Or we'll say it's that fire alarm going off in the home office of your home to represent work, right? But that fire alarm is telling you something, right? It's telling you that something needs to happen. There's a decision that needs to be made, or there's there's a way for you to grow, or a way for you to change or shift your perspective. Something needs to happen. A conversation needs to be had. Maybe you need to have that difficult conversation. Maybe you need to decide to leave that career and move into a different career or find a different place of work, right? Maybe you do need to just change your outlook and change your attitude and have a more positive way of interacting with your job, right? It's kind of like you can change your environment or you can change yourself.
Yeah.
Right. But there's something there that those emotions are cluing you into.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But we silence the alarm and the fire starts to rage on. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then, imagine now that you have a fire in the living room because you didn't actually you didn't actually investigate the fire in your office to understand why it was there in the first place. And you didn't actually take any action to put that fire out, whatever that action you investigated needed to be, right? Because there's different types of fires, right?
Right.
There's electrical fires. There's all these different types of grease fires, and they all require different types of fire extinguishers, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of is a great symbolism for there's a lot of different things that you might need to do to resolve a fire in your life. But you didn't investigate that. You didn't choose or find the right tool to resolve that fire in your office. So now it's actually causing problems at home. And now it's causing the way that you're showing up with your family. And now you have a fire in the living room where you spend time with your family. All metaphorical here, right? But rather than addressing that and turning into and investigating that fire alarm, right? What's going on here? What do I need to learn? How do I need to grow? What are the conversations I need to have? What are the decisions that I'm putting off and not making? Right? What's the amends that I may need to make? Whatever that might be, the boundaries that I need, right? I'm just going to keep silencing that alarm, right? I'm going to keep eating every time I feel those uncomfortable emotions.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ignore them. I'm not going to investigate them. Well, now I've got a fire in the bedroom, right? Now my relationship with my spouse or my significant other is being impacted, right? And so it's really starting to understand inherently that these are not bad emotions. No more than a fire alarm in your house is bad.
Right.
In fact, these emotions that you're feeling are essential.
Yeah.
In the same way that your fire alarm in your house is essential.
Yeah.
And you choosing to soothe or to silence those alarms really is like just turning that alarm off and letting the fire burn, right? And over time, we accumulate fires and we accumulate problems and unresolved issues. And that is what continues to drive depression, anxiety. You see how this stuff all feeds together, right?
Yeah.
So when you start to really see emotional eating through this lens, you start to understand that emotional eating, the way out of emotional eating, is not to silence the emotions with something like food, which is an ineffective tool, right? Or an ineffective action. The real solution is to investigate the fire, to investigate the emotion, to figure out what started it, where did this come from, why am I feeling it? And then you can start to understand, what do I need specifically to extinguish this fire and this emotion at its root, right? And then now we're not accumulating fires in our life. Now what I love about this is that when you turn into emotions and you investigate them instead of silencing them and walking away, it forces us to grow in the ways that we always needed to grow. It forces us to become resilient in the ways that we always needed to become resilient. It forces us to make decisions that we've needed to make for a long time.
Absolutely.
Right? It forces us into so much growth. And essentially it allows us to for the first time, actually start to become unstuck in life.
Yeah.
Right? And I would bet everything that those out there who are in the midst of really struggling with emotional eating and stress eating, stuck is a word that they would really relate to.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that's sort of the initial framework. Is it starts with a commitment to break, or at least to stop reinforcing that neuro connection association between painful, uncomfortable emotions and food and the dopamine that comes from that.
Yeah.
And then you also have to reframe your beliefs around those uncomfortable and painful emotions.
Yeah.
And understand that they're there for a reason. The same reason that if you stick your hand on a hot stove, right? That's hot. That hurts for a reason.
Yeah.
Because you need to pull your hand back.
So to kind of like piggyback off of your analogy, the fire alarm is still going to annoy you.
Yeah.
After a while. But then
Sure.
once you start to address the fire,
Mhm.
the more the alarm is going to be an alarm and not
For sure.
a stressor.
Totally.
Yeah.
And the more you do it, here's what I really love about this. The more you do it, every time you actually turn into an emotion and you investigate it and you take the right action to grow, to learn, to become more resilient, to make the right decisions, to do all the things, right? It's like a skill. Now you're developing a new reflex. And that's why I say the moment people understand this and they start to do it the right way, the growth trajectory in their life goes crazy, right? You don't just become unstuck, but it's like now you start actually like growing and building and experiencing life in a whole new way.
Yeah.
Right? Because you get good at it. Yeah. Like the more you do it, now I have the reflex of addressing stuff in my life.
Yeah.
Right? Now I'm not going to sit for a month or 2 months or 6 months or 2 years or 10 years and struggle and be stuck in the same problems. Now I'm becoming the person that when I hear that fire alarm, I put out that fire, right? I investigate, and you get faster and better and more reflexive at knowing like, oh, this is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm feeling it. This is the solution that I need to pursue in this moment. And then not only does that yield, I think, a massive amount of growth and an excitement in your own life. And I think it really leads to joy and happiness and fulfillment in a lot of ways. But now think about what that does for everybody else in your home and in your family, right? Because here's the thing, right? Where do most of us learn to emotionally eat? Where do most of us learn the frameworks, the tools that we do have that are not very effective?
From the home.
We learn them from our parents. We learn them from our grandparents. We learn them from the people who raised us, right? So for any of you who are listening, not only is this so important for you so that you can stop being stuck, so that you can actually have control over your thoughts and your behaviors and your actions in life to create the results that you want to create in life, but your kids and your grandkids are learning from you. Your tools will become their tools, right? If they see you silencing the fire alarm all the time with food,
They're going to think that's how you respond to it.
they're going to make those associations too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is why time after time after time, we see that it's not just an individual that is struggling, right? We see multiple people within a household struggling. Yeah. We see generation after generation carrying this through, right?
Yeah.
And so if you want to just not just lose pounds, but you want to keep them off, if you want to really actually go all the way and become physically, mentally, emotionally healthy and whole, which is why we call our program Healthy and Whole, right? If you want to actually change your family tree, this, I believe, is the pathway to do that.
I really like the analogy in the first place because, the fire alarms being the emotions, the fire being the actual issue that we need to address, and then us turning off the alarm being, being our less effective coping mechanisms, whether that's food, drugs, alcohol. It creates this really unpleasant picture, which I think is the first place to start when it comes to breaking out of this cycle. And it's recognizing that this is not an effective way to go about it. It's a painful process of continuing to silence the alarm. And the fire is just growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And like you said, it then affects your family and your friends and generations to come. So it creates this really unpleasant picture. And it goes back to, what we talk about during our other podcasts, which is pain versus pleasure. We need to create that leverage to help us understand that what we're doing to ourselves, is a cycle that we're in, while we are under the illusion or the perception that the food or whatever we're coping with is pleasureful. It's really causing the very misery that we're trying to escape. So I think I really love that analogy that you created. That's a really powerful way to look at it, especially like the unpleasant perception of not only the fact that it's affecting you in your home, but it's affecting everyone around you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that also brings me to what I think we do want to cover before we start to wrap up here, which is sometimes the question I'll get from people, or the concern that I will get from folks is, because emotional eating and stress eating is so close to addiction, it basically is a form of addiction, right?
Yeah.
Like when you look at something like alcohol addiction, right? You basically, for most people who struggle with alcohol addiction, you stop drinking and you are no longer a drinker. You never drink alcohol again, right? For the most part, right? It's rare that you see someone who actually becomes a successful occasional controlled drinker, right? But with food, we can't do that, right? As human beings, we have to have food. And we live in a world where, food tastes great. Obviously we can eat food that doesn't taste great, but that doesn't work for long-term sustainability either, right? So then the big question, and sometimes the concern is, okay, well, how do I turn away from emotional eating while also not feeling like, just like an alcoholic would have to, that I can never eat the foods that I love? And because then it's like there's this weird fear of, oh my gosh, but like I always emotionally ate chocolate. And so like, how am I ever going to be able to enjoy chocolate and not fall back into that emotional eating paradigm, right? And I think that it really comes down to, here's the framework that I like to give people for this. You have to be able to go from being an emotional eater. The goal is to go from being an emotional eater to a logical eater, right? I want to be a logical eater. And what does being a logical eater look like? And a logical eater looks like, I should be able to answer the questions, am I eating this food right now for the right reason, at the right time, in the right amounts? Because what we see with emotional eating is we're eating for the wrong reason. A lot of times we're not eating at the right time because we're not eating in response to hunger.
Yeah.
We're eating in response to an emotion, right? And then also, because of those two things together, it's like a runaway train. Like we just eat way too much, right? So if you can, the real answer there is to say, okay, am I eating this food for the right reasons right now? Am I eating it at the right time? And am I eating it in the right amounts? So right reason would be like, does it make sense for me right now based on my goals, based on the context of the other food that I've been eating? Am I eating it in response to an emotion or not? Am I hungry? Does it make sense? Right? So like, for instance, if I have been doing really well in losing weight, and my goal is to lose weight, things are going really well, and I want to have a cheat meal, and I make a conscious decision to have a cheat meal, or a treat or an indulgence. And I go and I do that. I would argue that that could be right reason, right time, and we can determine the right amount, right? But if I just had a cheat meal yesterday and the day before, and the day before, you know, if my goal is weight loss, but I've not been able to lose any weight for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, month, 5 weeks, like 5 months, whatever it is, I've been struggling, right? And I'm still turning to this food. Is it the right reason? Well, no, it doesn't fit in the context of my goals right now, right? I can logically say I wouldn't want to eat this right now. So why am I eating it? Right? It's not the right time. It's not the right reason. And I'm having trouble controlling the amount, right? So it's very easy. That's why I love this framework of right reason, right time, right amounts, because it's a super fast way to sniff out, right? In the absence of an actual fire alarm, am I eating this food for emotional reasons, or am I eating this food because it's the right food for me at this time in my journey in my life? And if it is the right food for the right reasons at the right time, then I should have no trouble controlling the amounts.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. If you guys are watching this on the YouTube channel, I would actually really love if you guys would go down and leave us some comments about the feedback.
Oh yeah.
Like, what did you learn? Was this helpful? Did you learn something from this? Has this opened your eyes in some way when it comes to emotional eating? I would really love some feedback on that. If you got value out of this, I would really appreciate if you would subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you would hit the like button, hit the notification bell. That tells YouTube that we are giving you guys value, and they will then serve this up to other people who need to hear it, right? So if you haven't subscribed, please do that, and we'll keep showing up. We'll keep giving you guys hopefully some value.
100%.
Episode to episode. So thanks for watching us here on the Healthy and Whole podcast. We'll see you next time.